The latest tech,
I'm Alexa. I can answer your questions.
interviews,
And we are evolving, and we are seeing an amazing opportunity that is happening.
accessibility.
Accessibility is one of our core values. It's even a part of our mission statement.
This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome to Double Tap TV. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We really enjoy your emails, so keep them coming. Feedback@ami.ca is the email address. On Twitter, you can reach out to @DoubleTapCanada. Don't forget to follow us, and of course, use that hashtag, which is AskDoubleTap, so we can always get to your messages. And more recently, we've announced our Instagram launch. It is @DoubleTap.online. I am Mark Aflalo with Stephen Scott each and every single week. I think that's kind of redundant now at this point, Stephen. I think people know that you're here, right?
Yeah, you can't get rid of me. Hello, Mark Afalalo. We'd only do that normally on the radio, but I just thought it would be appropriate to do it here as well. Yeah, and I get that response usually as well. Now, lately, we've been spreading our wings a little bit here when it comes to the topics and disabilities that we've been talking about here on Double Tap TV. Am I right, Mark?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, Stephen, and, I wanted to bring it up because this week is a shining example of just that. We've got a really exciting show lined up for you, talking about how tech and AI meets disability at some pretty amazing intersections. And today, it's voice.
Yeah, and it's important to say that, if you're a blind person, you can have other disabilities. You don't just get blindness given to you and suddenly that's it. You've had your disability quota for life. Other things can happen to you. And that is why today we're talking about voice. And it's important, of course, that we all use our voice when we talk about tech and disability. But you're coming at this from a rather different and more literal angle, aren't you?
Yeah, quite. If I asked you, for example, what is the most famous example of a digital synthesized voice? What would your answer be?
Oh, I'd be thinking about Siri, Amazon Echo, Google Home, that kind of thing.
Okay, what about when it comes to disabilities?
Well, if you're talking people, then I would say Stephen Hawking's got to be.
Okay, so where did that voice originate from? Because it's not unique.
No, it's not. And in fact, it's one of those voices that is so associated with Stephen Hawking, isn't it? That's the voice when you hear that voice, irrespective of where you hear it, you think of Stephen Hawking. But that was, of course, an IBM voice that was developed for him, and it's been used ever since as a voice on a number of different applications. A lot of blind people would know that voice, perhaps, through their screen reader. Other people might know it through point-of-sale machines or some of these talking devices that kick around sometimes. Sometimes when you use automated technology, you'll hear a voice like that. So, it's definitely not unique at all. The problem is, a lot of the time, that voice is the voice you're known by, but it's not your voice, Mark. That's the problem. It's not your actual voice. And I know that's something we're going to be picking up on this week, which is very interesting.
Yeah, no, I stumbled upon a company called VocaliD, and we're going to be talking to their founder and CEO in just a couple moments here on Double Tap TV. And that company is specialized in taking existing voice samples and turning them into unique voices for people who don't have their own voice. People who might be losing their voice can actually do things like banking their voice before it's too late so they can get their own voice synthesized. And it's more than just, a computer speaking aloud text-to-speech. There's intonation, there's emotion, there's feeling, and there's some great heartwarming stories just around the corner.
I think that's the bit that's most surprising. And when you told me we were doing this story this week, I was very intrigued about this because I love this idea of, as you say, banking your own voice. Now, this is something I guess we could all do, right? This is something which obviously is built for people who are losing their voice, but this is something we could essentially do. So should that day ever happen or ever come, that we would then be in a position where we'd be able to retrieve our voice and actually still have that. But that, yes, it's important for us. That would be important for me. But I guess when we think about family, when we think about friends, the impact that must have on them hearing their loved one's voice again.
Yeah, it's pretty substantial. And rather than me even dive into how this is done and the things that can be done, let's take a quick break and come back with our next guest. This is Double Tap TV with Stephen Scott and Mark Aflalo. Again, follow us online. It is @DoubleTapCanada. Use that hashtag, which is #DoubleTap. And if you want to email us, it's feedback@ami.ca. We take a quick break and come back here on Double Tap TV.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit ami.ca/doubletap. This is Double Tap TV.
We are back on Double Tap TV tackling a very interesting topic. tech, voice, and disability. I am Mark Aflalo with Stephen Scott by my side. Stephen, our next guest is an extremely interesting woman. She was named one of the top 17 leaders in voice in 2020 as a voice visionary, a recognition bestowed upon those working in the voice space by a panel of journalists and voice technology peers. She's the founder and CEO of Massachusetts-based VocaliD, which she founded thanks to a research project that she ran with funding from the U.S. National Science Foundation. The seed for VocaliD was planted in 2014 at a TED Woman conference, where Dr. Rupal Patel exclaimed that each one of us has a unique voice print that reflects our age, our size, even our lifestyle and personality. Rupal Patel, thank you so much for being here this week. Rupal, what gave you the idea for VocaliD?
Yeah, so VocaliD actually started as a research project initially in my lab at Northeastern University, where I'm a professor. And then I spun it out in 2015 when I started to see that there was actually potentially more interest for people who were not speaking to have a voice that was uniquely theirs.
Stephen, what was the light bulb moment for you? When did you realize that you could help people who don't have a voice?
Yeah, there's actually, I think, two moments. There's the moment of like trying to figure out like how do we actually make a voice for someone who is unable to speak, and that goes all the way back to like 2002 when I was at a conference and I was presenting some of my early work for my PhD, which was showing that people with severe speech disorder, let's say someone with cerebral palsy or other conditions, still had the ability to control some aspects of their voice. So they could still control, let's say, the pitch of their voice or the loudness of their voice. This is called prosody. And literally after sort of giving this talk about the fact that there's preserved vocal quality in their speech, I walk into the exhibit hall of this conference where I see different people using different kinds of assistive technologies, and the same voice is being heard around me, like everywhere around me. And then the point I noticed most was this young girl and this grown man using different devices, but the exact same voice. So to me, that was the spark of how do we, if there truly is signal in their voice that's uniquely theirs, how do we use that? How do we harness that to make a voice that's, from their device that sounds like it could belong to them? And that was the beginning of the research. And so that seed was planted. And for many years, we were trying to crack that nut. Like, how do you, in fact, build a synthetic voice, which requires hours of recording, which obviously someone who can't speak can't do. And even if they can do, it's not going to sound clear. So the idea was then to borrow the voice samples of someone who could speak, who was similar to them in age and gender and so on. And so this is the work that we were doing in my lab for a few years, about 5 years actually, funded by the National Science Foundation here in the US. That was the beginning of the science idea. And then I guess, Mark, you were asking, well, when did it become a reality in terms of the company? Well, I think I was thinking a lot around, well, how do we build this and how do you scale it? So I had a chance to talk about the science behind the technology at TED Women in 2013. It was December 2013. And during that time, what we saw is right after the talk, I had this like call to action in the talk, which said, well, what if you could donate your voice to someone in need? And we really thought a few hundred people may sign up, because at that time we needed about 7 to 10 hours of someone reading in order for us to then build a synthetic voice. And we got lots of volunteers. We got thousands of volunteers. So that was the second real inflection point to say, oh, if we have that many volunteers who are willing to contribute their voice, maybe we can do this for more than the handful of people we could build a voice for in the lab. So in the lab, it was a research project. And then when we pulled it out, this could actually be used for people who needed a voice to speak.
So how long did it take to go from being an idea to something that could actually be used with someone who has a disability?
It really took about a decade of the scientific discovery piece of it, because it's actually a very difficult problem scientifically to kind of decouple. So you think about it very simply. You have an egg, a brown egg and a white egg. What you want to do is from the brown egg, just get the yolk, and from the white egg, just get the white part, right? And you want to recombine it. That's actually what we're doing in this digital world. We're saying we want just some aspects of the person who can't speak, not the stuff that makes their speech unclear, but the part that is about who they are, their identity. And then we have to borrow the voice quality and the characteristics of actually producing consonants and vowels for someone who's similar to them. And then we recombine them together and create this sort of morphed egg. It's sort of weird to talk about eggs, but what's interesting here is once you have you do all the signal processing to combine the source and the filter characteristics of these different voices, you then train a machine to speak in such a way that's as clear as the voice donor, but it sounds like it could belong to this person. So there's so many different pieces of technology that go into creating this morph that it took a long time to figure out how to get that right combination. And then the other big thing was, okay, you can do it, but you can do it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. How do you do it for hundreds of dollars, right? Or maybe a couple $1,000s. That's the real trick. And there we've been fortunate that timing has been really right, that today there's so much going on in machine learning and artificial intelligence that we can leverage that to build out these voices at scale.
I'm really intrigued, Rupal. What was that first moment like when you essentially gave someone a voice, or even gave someone back a voice?
Yeah, so the very first one was actually one of our research participants. She had participated in a study with us, and it was one for more of a basic science study. But we were actually still using her voice samples when we were doing this other work to kind of customize the voices. And one of the reporters that was talking about the story with us kind of pushed me to say, well, have you ever given this voice to anybody who you've been building these voices for? You keep doing these studies. Well, how do you know people are going to want this, right? And so I hadn't talked to this young woman for, she was 9 or 10 when she had contributed her voice samples for a different study. And I hadn't talked to her for a while. And so I reached back out to her based on this, talked to her mom about what we've been doing. By this time, she was 16, 17 years old. And her mom was like, what, you're making a different voice for her device? I don't quite get it. And then I played a sample for her, and the mom was just absolutely, like, she was speechless. She was like, wow, this is what she would have sounded like had she been able to speak, right? And then she said, stop. I don't want to hear any more of this. And I thought, oh gosh. And she goes, I want Samantha to hear this voice. And she sounds so much like this voice sounds so much like my older son, who is, her sibling. And so anyway, Samantha came back from school and she listened to this, and she's like, oh, wow, that's cool. And so she explained that she was interested in it. And so we were using a sample from her from when she was like 9 or 10 years old. So of course, for a 16, 17-year-old, it didn't quite sound exactly like what she had imagined herself to. So we went through it again and got a sample of her voice and rebuilt her voice. And I remember when we delivered her voice to her, it was this really amazing moment where her face just lit up. This was a young woman who has a condition where, if you look at her on the street, you can't necessarily tell. She's a fashionista. She is an everyday teen, but she's unable to speak with her natural voice. And so she had learned to sign, and that's awesome. And she has the manual dexterity to do that. But in many cases, when she encounters people in everyday situations, they don't always know sign, right? And so after she got her own unique voice, she has been in many more situations where she can actually use the device as a method of communication, and she can use her own voice. That's opened up a lot of opportunities for her, like, for example, summer jobs she can take or things she can do. And as she gets older, it's really important for her, like that fuller identity and that fuller participation.
Rupal, please stay right there. We need to take a quick break, and when I come back, I want to jump back a bit because you mentioned something about banking a voice, and I'm super curious about what that really means. This is Double Tap TV. Please get involved. feedback@ami.ca. On Twitter, follow us at Double Tap Canada with that hashtag, which is #DoubleTap, and now on Instagram @doubletap.online. When we come back, more with Rupal Patel from VocaliD.
Love Double Tap TV? Listen to AMI Audio for Double Tap Canada every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern for news and reviews on everything tech. This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome back to Double Tap TV. Stephen Scott and Mark Aflalo with you each and every single week. We are in conversation with Rupal Patel, the CEO and founder of VocaliD. Rupal, before the break, we talked about banking. Now, many people would not think twice about giving blood or, banking their cord blood for their kids when they're born. But talk to me about this concept, banking your own voice.
Yeah. So it's interesting. When we first started, we thought, voice banking, that's been done. And, voice, that's how you make a synthetic voice, right? But it hadn't been done to reach everyday people. Yes, a voice actor could go and record their voice, and then that would be turned into a synthetic voice. But to reach everyday people who are about to lose their voice, either a head and neck cancer or to a degenerative condition like ALS, there wasn't anything really like sort of innovative in my mind as a techie to say, but that's already possible. What are we doing? What we found is that by making the website so easy to use, and where you go and you record for someone else, or whether it's for yourself, we were in fact making this accessible. So accessibility is not just some new technique. Accessibility is also making something that already exists possible for people, right? And so it's been really interesting to see not just people who are losing their voice to conditions like ALS or Parkinson's disease, but we also are seeing now these individuals with head and neck cancer who have 2 weeks or sometimes a few days before they know that they're going to lose part of their tongue or their entire voice box. They know they're never going to speak again with their natural voice. How incredible it is that they will go through anything to just record their voice so that they can have that. And it's not just that they have access to their voice and then create the synthetic voice for them afterwards, but often we've also seen their family members benefit from having stored this person's voice because they can listen to it again. And, unfortunately, some folks who have head and neck cancer, their survival rate isn't going to be very, very long, but they can work again, so that's also interesting, is that if they have a way to communicate with the world after that's easy and that's not stigmatizing, because there are prostheses available, but being able to type on your phone and have that come out as your voice, that is very liberating for many people.
Rupal, you say it's accessible and easy to do, so how can we bank our own voices?
Yeah, so the Human Voice Bank is basically a repository. It's a website. So you go to vocalid.ai/voicebank, make an account. And once you make an account, depending on what the purpose is for your account, are you just contributing your voice or is it for yourself? Then you're asked a few questions like, what do you want to read about? Because you're going to have to read at least 2 to 3 hours of audio, of speech, in order for us to get enough for us to use for someone else or for yourself. And then once you've chosen the categories, so the categories are things like science and technology, poetry, world of wonder, like there's all sorts of different topics. And we're always kind of updating the content so that people have something fresh to read about or to speak about. And then what you see is, it's like a teleprompter, essentially. You're given line by line to read aloud, and you record, stop recording, playback. Essentially what we want to do is capture the best recordings possible from someone, so that those recordings are clear of noise, they don't have reverberation, there's no dog barking or television in the background or whatever else. So we need good, clean audio. So you have to be in a quiet room using a laptop or a computer, not a tablet. And we need you to use a Google Chrome browser, and you wear a headset microphone. I don't know if I have one with me, but essentially you have to wear something that has a microphone attached to your headset, because that way your mouth is not moving around too much from where the microphone is. That we can collect really good, clean audio.
So what happens next, Rupal? Do you guys keep the voice in the cloud somewhere, and then I can request it when I need it?
That's right. So right now we're just, if someone banks their voice with us, it is in the voice bank. So oftentimes we're, using that banked voice for someone who is unable to actually generate their own speech. And so there we have to find the right matches. So we have to find someone similar to them in age and accent and all of those things. But if you're banking your voice for yourself and you need it, at that point you would order that voice to be built. And at that point, we would then use the recordings that we have and generate the synthetic voice. There's also a capability to preview what the voice would sound like and potentially record more samples in order to make the voice better. And many of our clients who have a condition where they know that they are going to be using this voice afterwards, what they'll do is preview at different stages so that they can kind of hear what it's going to sound like. It's one of the things that we've been doing just so that we know that a lot of the technology can do some piece of it, but if the recordings aren't good or we don't have enough recordings, we can't do anything more with that, right? So it's really, the onus is on both parts, the technology, but also the recordings themselves and the sufficient sample of recordings.
Dr. Rupal Patel, thank you so much for being with us this week on Double Tap TV.
This is a really, really cool technology. There's so many great videos online. If you search for VocaliD, some great inspirational stories about little kids who, didn't have a voice, whose siblings donated their voice, and they created something really unique for these people who didn't have the ability to speak in the first place. And then, of course, then there's adults, who lost their voice or who are losing their voice. The ability to bank it and be able to kind of withdraw that or use that in the future when you can't use your own voice and suddenly your real voice can be used electronically. That's pretty significant, and that's pretty impactful emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, when I came into this conversation, I was thinking immediately about how this could help improve synthesized voices, the voices I tend to listen to all day long. We're seeing more and more of those synthesized voices be used every day in everyday applications, even for blind people, like audio description, for example, certainly on the devices we use. And I thought, what a great project. This is going to humanize that. But we're actually seeing something far bigger than that, giving people back their voice. And I don't think we can look past that at all, frankly. That is the biggest news here. And I think it's huge. The fact that you can not only give someone a voice, but not go back to those Stephen Hawking's days. I mean, it became a voice synonymous with him, but it wasn't him. And I think if we were able to hear what he sounded like, we might have a very different feeling about the man. Not at any, personal level. I'm sure we'd all think he was a genius anyway, right? But the point is that you would know him rather than what sounded like a computer. And I think that's huge.
This is one of those companies that I think we're going to follow along for many, many seasons worth of this show and see where they're going on the progression and see some other really, really cool stories aside from, banking in my voice and see how it's used. Stephen, thank you for being here, as always, by my side. You guys at home, it's feedback@ami.ca. I cannot repeat that enough because we love chatting with you. We love, hearing from you all the time. On Twitter, reach out. It is @DoubleTapCanada with that hashtag, which is #AskDoubleTap. And of course, now on Instagram, @DoubleTap.online. On behalf of Stephen Scott and Rupal Patel, I am Mark Aflalo. Thank you guys for being here on this edition of Double Tap TV.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit ami.ca/doubletap. Hosted by Mark Aflalo and Stephen Scott. Editing, Will Attar. Production assistants, Wendy Kaufman. Content review, Zachary Aflalo. Social media, Andy Wynn. Segment producer, Sean Priest. Voiceover, Anna Vicino. Integrated Described Video Specialist, Ron Rickford. Coordinating producer, Jennifer Johnson. Director, Production, Kara Nye. Director Programming, Brian Perdue. VP Content Development and Programming, John Melville. President and CEO, David Arrington. Copyright 2021, Accessible Media, Inc.